Now, schemas. What did I talk about schemas? I provided with a lot of examples about schemas. So what are schemas all about? Why do we use them? How do they help us? And again, remember, schemas is related to concepts in a more well. You guys go to your notes. You should answer. You should definitely know what schemas is based on what you have in your notes. And again, if you for some reason you don't have it, it's not clear to you, once again, send us an email. Okay, problem solving. So we talk about algorithms. What are algorithms? How do algorithms differ from heuristics, for example? Can you give me examples of algorithms? Can you give me examples of heuristics that we discussed in class? Now, when it comes to heuristic, why do we use them? Remember I mentioned about information processing and motivational constraints. What are these information processing and motivational constraints all about? Again, you should definitely have a clear understanding about these two type of constraints that make us use heuristics more, or make us increase the use of heuristics. Okay, so what are our analogies? Remember the example that I brought in class. Now we also have mental roadblocks to problem solving. Here we have two types of fixations. We have mental sets and functional fixedness. Again, here's another good example of two concepts that are very likely to ask you questions about these two concepts in the exam. But guess what? I'm not going to ask you for a definition of these two concepts. I'm going to ask you for examples. And of course, if you know the definition and you can provide an example based on what you understand of the definition, you're pretty much good, ready to answer the question in the exam. But again, if you are just trying to memorize a definition and you're not able to come up with examples, if you're not able to tell me, for example, what's the difference between mental sets and functional fixedness, I'm not sure that you're going to be able to answer the question in the exam. Now, the same thing applies to these three heuristics that I mentioned in class. So you have the availability heuristic, you have the representative heuristic, you have the anchoring and adjustment heuristics, and these are terms that you probably will be very inclined to just memorize the terms, memorize what they are, what these concepts make reference to. Well, again, it's a good idea to know what these different heuristics mean. But again, for me, the most important thing is that for you to come up with a very good example of each of these heuristics. And of course, you might be able to, I would encourage you to remember the examples that I use in class. That would be very helpful. And if possible, try to come out with your own examples. Okay, I'm going to, again, when it comes to heuristics and the question that I will ask you in the exam, very likely that I'm not going to ask you for just a plain definition. I'm just going to provide you with an example of a particular use of a heuristic, and you will have to identify what heuristic I'm making reference to. Okay, finally we have chapter 8, and of course, you know, chapter 8 is a work in progress. We haven't finished it, and it's very likely that I'm not going to be able to cover all the material that's in your study guide. So one thing that I definitely want you to remember, that if there's anything that I do not cover in class that's in your study guide, well, that certainly is not going to be in your exam. So the first thing I covered was circadian rhythms. You have to know what circadian rhythm is all about, and what kind of biological functions our circadian rhythm regulate. Why is it important? Why do we care about circadian rhythms? And again, you just make sure that you just not simply know the definition, but think in terms of how circadian rhythms affect you. What does it really affect you? One thing you probably might want to think in terms of whether you are a morning and an evening person. And what does that mean? What would it mean if you were to say that you are a morning person, well, make sure that you are able to answer that question. I brought an example of memory task and elderly people. Remember that? So obviously, from the study that I introduced to you in class, basically I was trying to illustrate the importance of circadian rhythms in memory tasks and other um, other things related to performances as well. Okay, suprachiasmatic nucleus, we know that that is related to circadian rhythms. Well, what is it? What is this structure? How is this structure related to the pineal gland? And what's the pineal gland has to do with melatonin? What has the melatonin do with the suprachiasmatic nucleus? And what does all this got to do with circadian rhythms? Again, make sure that you make the connections. By the way, if you start making connections, of course, you're using elaborative encoding, and that song is going to be very, very useful for you to be able to remember things better, to recall them better, of course, and you will be more prepared for the exam. Okay, consciousness, importance and function of consciousness. We show a video in class and we talk about the importance and function of consciousness in daily life. So just make sure that you remember what I mentioned in class, go through your notes. When it comes to level of consciousness, I talk about consciousness being basically a continuous of different type of levels of consciousness that we experience during the day, and just remember the examples I provided in class. When it comes to attention, what did we learn about attention and the examples that we brought it up in class? Remember that I show you a video about Donald Broadbent and his work on attention. Cocktail party phenomenon has related to the importance of attention. Oh, something that probably will help you a lot to answer any question related to this topic is the class activity that we use for illustrating attention, okay, or the importance of attention. So do you remember what activity I'm making reference about? Does gorilla ring a bell? Anyways, make sure that you remember that. Okay, so daydreams and fantasies, this is something that we haven't covered yet. We're going to talk about this during class on Tuesdays most likely. So again, learn to know the benefits of daydreaming and fantasies, and just when you're paying attention in class about what I'm going to be talking about, this benefits of daydreaming and fantasies, just make sure that you can in some way project these benefits to your own personal life, and that so will help you guys to remember this for the exam. Okay, so we're going to be talking about the function of sleep. I'm going to be talking about two different theories. We're going to be talking about the repair and restoration theory. So I want you to know what this theory is all about. I'm going to be mentioning in class some of the problems with this theory. I'm going to be talking about this energy conservation theory, sleep, and probably you might want to determine or try to identify how these two theories complement each other, because that's definitely something I will mention in class, that it's not that this theory contradicts each other. This basically, in a way, they're complementing each other. And again, I definitely need you guys to have a good sense of what these theories are all about. Okay, measuring sleep activity. I'm just going to give you a brief introduction of how this sleep activity measuring is done to begin with, and when we talk about measuring sleep activity, all we're talking about is brain waves. And here you're going to have to make sure that you are able to know exactly how the brain waves that we are able to observe in these 5 different stages of sleep, different from each other. That's basically what I'm going to be talking a lot. Well, not a lot, but when I make reference to the sleep activities, I will be making reference to the different brain waves, how different they are, how do they look. I'm going to talk about sleep spindles, and sleep spindles are going to be type of brain waves that are going to be very characteristic of one particular stage of sleep. The same thing when we talk about delta waves or slow wave sleep. These are going to be, it's going to be easy for you to identify these delta waves as being part of 2 very distinct stages of sleep. I'll be talking about paradoxical sleep when we talk about REM sleep. Of course, probably something that you might want to know or remember is why is it we call it paradoxical sleep to begin with. And we're going to be talking about cycling, and we're going to move to why do we dream. We're going to give 2 perspectives. We're going to give a psychological perspective and a physiological perspective. When we talk about the psychological perspective, I will be talking about manifest and latent content of dreams. These are all ideas that were proposed by Freud. And of course, I want you guys to be able to know what manifest and latent content of dreams are. Yes, know the definition, but again, make sure that you can think of an example. And when it comes to manifest and latent content of dreams, of course you can try to come out with your own examples. I mean, you can even think about what you dreamt last night. What aspect of that dream corresponds to a manifest content, or what part of that dream corresponds to the latent content, and so forth. So once again, try to make sure that you are able to know the concepts and apply those concepts and put them in the context of an example. And I'm going to be talking about the physiological perspective, and I hope that I have time to show you a video that talks about a little bit about what this perspective is all about. Okay, when we come to this last topic of chapter 8, I probably won't have time to cover hypnosis, but then again, if you're in class, you'll be able to know exactly whether I cover or not. We probably will talk about psychoactive drugs. I will try to talk about the nucleus accumbens, and I will talk about drugs and the action of dopamine. And I'll try to talk about the psychoactive drugs and physical dependence. And I'll give you, well, I guess you'll have a good sense of whether or not this is going to be covered in class or not. I'll give you more details about this, of course, on Tuesday.